Hello, everyone. Welcome to Community Connection, your window to the world around you. And we have a wonderful world that's going to open up to us today with my guest, the amazing Barbara McQuade, who is the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Michigan, who was appointed back in 2010 by President Obama. Barbara, it's always such a pleasure and an honor to have you and to talk about the amazing things that you're doing. It's been 6 years, 2010, and you have done a phenomenal job. Not only have you done a phenomenal job, you've had a lot of challenging things that have come across your desk in this last 6 years. Talk to us about from 2010 until now and your vision.
Well, it's gone by in a blur.
It's
gone by very fast because we're incredibly busy every day. But I'm really proud of some of the things that we've accomplished. Certainly many challenges still continue to exist. Some of our priorities have been reducing violent crime, and we still see plenty of violent crime, more than I would care to see. Public corruption has been a significant priority. I'm very proud of some of the things we've accomplished in that arena, and so that's been important. We've wanted to work to improve civil rights. One of the things I'm really proud of is creating our office's first ever civil rights unit, and so we've done some very good work there that I'm proud of, and I hope we've created an institution within the office that will endure long after I leave.
You've really done a lot of visionary work where, from 2010 until now, you've really instigated a lot of those projects and a lot of the vision that you had back then. Earlier we were talking about gun violence and gun control, and you've done a lot, and you actually, there's a project called Detroit One that you're very much involved with. Tell us about that. And obviously, we don't have a solution yet, but educating people and making sure that things are in place is really important. So, what kind of things are you working on to? I mean, Detroit is. We've had, I don't know, was it nine killings this past week? What do we do with that?
Yeah, it's a significant problem, and there are some root causes that are difficult for us in law enforcement to try to eradicate, poverty, unemployment, and some things. But we want to
the right to bear arms.
Sure, there are a lot of challenges, but we want to do everything we can to make sure that the public is safe. Detroit is a city really on the rise, and a lot of wonderful things are happening there, but people need to feel safe if we're going to be the kind of city that we want to be. So Detroit One is a strategy designed to reduce gun violence, and we have, believe it or not, the year it started was 2012, when we had 386 homicides in Detroit, and over that time we've reduced that 12% and 15% by bringing together various law enforcement agencies in the federal government, state and local, to work together on the same priority offender list, going after the same offenders, so they're all on the same page.
And having that communication together is really vital.
Right, meeting weekly at the precinct level to talk about who in the community is causing gun violence. So that's been an important part, but a very significant part of Detroit One is also the community piece. We've engaged a lot of community partners in hopes of defeating the no-snitch culture that we sometimes see in Detroit, where people are shot, there's a party, gunfire occurs, and no one talks to the police. And so that continues to be a problem because people are afraid. People don't always trust the police. And so we've been working with our Detroit One partners, some in the faith community, some in the nonprofit community, to try to defeat that culture, because ultimately, if we don't, that culture will defeat all of us.
Absolutely, and you need that partnership and that cohesiveness, community and policing. And talking about police and community trust, I know that there's various organizations and various initiatives that you were part of, even 12 years ago with the Bridges Initiative in the Metro Detroit area, bringing community and police and government officials together. How successful has that been, and has the conversation really been one to be beneficial for both ends?
I think Bridges has been very successful. Of course, we're not done yet, and there's more relationship building we need to do, but the idea of Bridges was to bring together members of the community and law enforcement on a quarterly basis to have candid conversations about things that are occurring in law enforcement, things like no-fly lists and watch lists, border interrogations when people try to cross from Canada or arrive at the airport, surveillance in mosques, and those kinds of things. because I think if you don't engage with the community, then urban myths can result and get blown out of proportion. At the same time, I think having to answer to the community makes government more accountable, knowing that, wow, next quarter I'm going to have to talk to the community about what we did in this case. So I think it's been mutually beneficial. It's, I think, resulted in, as I said, to be successful, law enforcement needs to have credibility and the trust of the people it serves. And so if you want to get the tips you need and the information about wrongdoing, people need to trust that you're doing the right thing, that you're not there to target people or on witch hunts, but you really are just trying to keep people safe in a fair way.
Absolutely. And I know you mentioned, no-fly lists and what have you, and there was such a vast time frame where there was no communication between the departments, and it was very, very difficult to get someone off the fly list, even though it was very evident. So I think those kinds of things have changed, and those conversations have been had. But going back to the gun violence, do you think that the accessibility, of course, I mean it's definitely obvious, but in terms of gun violence and more so hate crimes, rather than just, I mean, either one is horrible, but one is a little bit different than the other. But we've seen so much hate crimes. What do you focus on when those kinds of things happen, and what do you think is the underlying reasoning because of the increased level of hate crimes? Is it because people are more in tune, or is it just what they're being subjected to? I mean, what is going on in our world?
I'm not sure. I think it's a confluence of a couple of things. One is I think that there is a big...
And obviously you have all the answers, right?
Yeah, no, I don't have all the answers. But, I try to read and do research on this and obtain as much training as I can. I think there is certainly a school of thought that says things like the election of President Obama brought with it a backlash from the white supremacist group. Sure. Changing demographics of America with more immigrants who are welcome here and more people of color has brought with it a backlash. Increasing federalization has brought with it a backlash from the states' rights anti-government groups. And so I think there is some sentiment there that has fueled some of those sentiments. At the same time, I think the internet, as wonderful as it is and as great a tool as it is for everyone, it is also a great tool for people to share views of hate and to instigate others. We have seen it in the hate crimes arena. We've seen it with ISIS in terms of recruiting young people, and we see it in the internet child predator arena. It makes it so easy for someone who used to maybe look at dirty pictures in his basement and order them through the mail, now has ability to connect with other like-minded individuals around the world. And so they egg each other on, and the currency for child predators is, I want to see new and recent child pornography. So they create it on cell phones with audio and visual and video and share it with each other. And this is, these aren't just drawings of things that people would find repulsive. This is crime. This is children being abused and sexually assaulted for the pleasure of someone else to see. And so we've seen a real spike in that crime, and I think the internet has really fueled a lot of it.
Absolutely. And not only, children are watching this too, and that's what's really scary, because here they are being exposed to something that adults can't handle this, but to their maturity level, and they're looking at this, and they become sensitized way too early, and it becomes okay, and it becomes very permissive. And I think that is just a crime, the biggest crime against humanity, because the kids are losing their innocence. So how do you protect? How do we protect our kids from this? I mean, everybody has computers. I mean, it's 2-3 computers in the house. Just like there was a time you only had one TV, and now you've got. It's the same kind of concept. So how do we protect our kids?
It's really difficult, especially in a country like America that values all of these freedoms. We value the freedom of speech, to look at what you want on the internet, the freedom to have guns under the Second Amendment. So it's very difficult. To some extent, the responsibility is on parents. But as you said, not only is there multiple computers in the home, but a lot of kids have smartphones. How do you police that when they're outside of your house? And so, teaching them good values is the best that you can do. But I don't know what the answer is, because so much of this material is out there on the internet for kids to see.
It is. It's an issue, and I think it's an issue of our time. And I hope that by the time our grandkids, are come about, that we have some kind of thing in place. And I'm all for freedom of speech and, what have you, and our constitutional rights. But when they start violating the rights of just, existence and being able to form, some kind of morality, it's a bit scary. So I think the conversation needs to continue on that. Again, hate crimes, it's always a conversation as to whether something is a hate crime or whether it's a crime. So, what is the difference when you prosecute something that is designated as a hate crime against something that is just blatantly a crime? What is the difference between those, and how do you approach those things?
Yeah, under the federal law, there's a couple different categories of crimes. So an assault causing serious bodily injury or a death that's motivated by race, religion, national origin, disability, or sexual orientation. If you can prove that bias motive, then you can make it into a hate crime. In addition, except for race, which is covered under the 13th Amendment anti-slavery provisions, for all the other categories to be a federal crime, we also have to prove that there was some impact on interstate commerce. So a crime occurring in a private home would not be a federal hate crime. It has to be in a public transportation. Could be in a public store, but some place of public accommodation where the public has the right to go. And so that can be a hook that's a little bit challenging. But when those factors are all present, I'm very interested in bringing that as a hate crime, because I think sometimes people criticize hate crime statutes and say, aren't these just special laws for special groups? But I think it's really important when a hate crime occurs to charge it as a hate crime. It brings enhanced penalties because it says you committed this crime not just against this individual, but you did it because you wanted to spread fear among an entire community. And that's why it's so important, I think, to respond with a hate crimes charge that says we're not going to tolerate this in our community because we want to protect everyone in our community.
So you have Chapel Hill with the 3 individuals that were shot dead, and there was a controversy and a conversation about whether it was a hate crime or whether it was about a certain parking spot. So you have that, and then you have South Carolina, where he was in a public place, and many people were killed and affected, and of course they had the right to be there. So how do you weigh in on both of those in terms of hate crime affecting commerce, basically, because it was in a public place in a church, right? Would
that one, I think because it's race, it doesn't need to be, because I think it's covered by the anti-slavery provisions of the 13th Amendment. So when it's race, you don't even need that. Okay. So both of those cases are cases that are being considered by the Department of Justice. So I don't want to speak on them generally, but just my personal opinion of how you would weigh those factors. The Chapel Hill case, I don't know if there was a place of public accommodation, but it was a parking lot, so I think there's a possibility there. The other thing you have to look for is courts have interpreted it very narrowly, so you have to show that it was the but-for cause of the hate crime, that but for that characteristic, the crime would not have occurred. There was a case out of Ohio where an Amish man was assaulted and his beard was removed from him, which is considered, a very respectful part of his religion, and the court invalidated it. They said that wasn't the only reason. It was a mixed motive crime. That was only one of the reasons, and therefore it was not sufficient to make it a hate crime. So I think in Chapel Hill, if there is also this other motive of parking, it could really complicate the case, because what a prosecutor doesn't want to do is lose a winnable case by adding an element that can't be proven. It can certainly be proven as a homicide. And so if the state can charge it as a simple homicide, then that might be preferable to adding this other element of hate crime if it's mixed motive. So that's something a prosecutor looking at all of the evidence would have to weigh, because at the end of the day, although a hate crime conviction is more powerful than a simple homicide conviction, you also want to win the conviction.
Absolutely. But going back to the Amish guy, if the perpetrator didn't know that was a major violation of his character and who he was, would he have shaved a regular person or not?
Right. I mean, exactly. So that's why that case has made it more complicated for all prosecutors to bring these cases. And then in South Carolina, I think there's plenty of evidence that his intent was to harm them because of their race. So could that be charged as a hate crime? Probably. I think the state is taking the lead there because it's a death-eligible offense under the state law,
right,
but not under the federal law. So they might actually get a more severe penalty under the state. So I think at the moment the Justice Department is letting the state take the lead on the charges, but continuing to investigate.
You know, and the nation's conversation went towards the flag, you know, the Confederate flag, and, you know, what do we do with that? I mean, I understand that is extremely important, and unfortunately, you know, that was hung in the building and what have you, and I think that conversation needs to be had. But what should be the focus here in terms of what happened? I think it was almost blatant, because he obviously uttered some words prior to, so he didn't leave too much for the imagination. So what would your vision be on that? I mean, in terms of the flag, in terms of what happened, and in terms of what his motives obviously were.
Well, first, the fact that the flag is coming down, I think, is a great thing.
Absolutely.
And if this, this is a tragedy, and certainly no one should pay for their life for that. But if some good can come of it, that's a wonderful thing. But that's really just a symptom of a deeper problem,
yes.
And
Symbol.
I don't want anyone to think that, well, now we've solved the problem, right?
Exactly.
Because it's a much deeper problem, and I think the media focuses quite a bit on the threat of international terrorism. We hear a lot about the ISIS threat and others, and that is a significant threat. But I think the federal government considers domestic terrorism to be as significant a threat as the international terrorism threat. In fact, there is a Department of Justice working group on domestic terrorism that has been very focused on the sovereign citizen threat, which are people who are sort of anti-federal government. They don't recognize the federal government. The white supremacist movement. There's an environmentalist movement, animal rights, who pose significant threats of violence.
And so Timothy McVeigh's are still very much alive in our country.
Great example, and can cause very serious damage. And in some ways, might pose more of a threat because they're here. They're right here. You know, ISIS is really focused on its geographic space overseas, although it is inspiring people to violence here as well. But the domestic terrorism threat is a very significant one, and this white supremacist group, as I said, fueled by anti-Obama messages. Sure. I mean, I think one of the things that Dylan Roof wrote in his so-called manifesto was about how he perceived that blacks were taking over America, and he was going to do something about it. And so there is that irrational fear out there, and I think we should not overlook it.
No, absolutely not. And I guess if there's any kind of silver lining, is that flag came down, you know, not to be...
Although, and I think, again, we're talking back to the symptom of a deeper problem. Right. I have also read that, you know, places like Walmart and other stores have said they're going to stop selling it. I have read that the demand for the Confederate flag has gone way up because people want to find them. So obviously that sentiment is still out there.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that, but that's very interesting. Very interesting. Obviously, you know, ISIS has been a household word, and unfortunately, they've been, you know, gaining momentum in terms of recruiting and what have you. What have you seen within our area in Michigan, basically, if anything, in regards to that threat and that fear?
We've not seen a lot of recruiting here, but I do worry that everybody is vulnerable. They do
go after the vulnerable, sort of desolate, very, you know, individual who really doesn't have anything to invest other than in something like that.
And sometimes, a lot of the people who have signed up and traveled to join up with ISIS have been young people, you know, teenagers, 17, 18, 19 years old. Many have been female. And they're experts at recruiting kids. And it's not just Muslims they're recruiting kids to become converts. So everyone is really at risk. And they are kids who are disaffected, looking for something important in their lives. And, you know, a lot of teenagers find themselves in that situation. But they're experts on social media in grooming these kids and explaining and describing a very glamorous life that they could come live if they would just, you know, come join up or come marry one of these guys. You know, they fall in love with an online persona who probably doesn't exist. Right. And then, you know, it sounds like this very glamorous life that they're going to, but they're absolutely victims. in the same way sexual predators victimize kids, these people are victimizing kids and trying to get them to travel. And once they get there, they're going to use them, as a suicide bomber. They used a kid out of Miami for that because they want to say, look, an American blew himself up in the name of ISIS, because they want to exploit kids like that. So we want to get out and just really raise awareness about how all these groups radicalize online. The white supremacists, the anti-government groups, and ISIS. They send these, radicalizing messages online, and kids see this stuff, and over again they become desensitized to the violence and
Right.
glamorized by this portrait of, a romantic vision of war, and they want to go join up. So we really want to make sure parents are aware of this threat, because we've seen lots and lots of kids take up the call.
What are the signs? I mean, if parents are watching, what are the signs? What should they look for?
I guess it's, kids who are withdrawing and disengaging from their normal activities. If, they're not interested in their friends or school or the activities that they used to be interested in, spending a lot of time online, maybe showing a strange interest in violence, watching videos that are violent and those kinds of things. So just withdrawing. Shannon Conley, a girl from Denver, signed up for one of these explorer courses, Army Explorers, because she wanted to learn how to shoot a gun. She went to firearms and tactics training because she thought it would be useful to her when she went. When she traveled overseas.
Lord.
So I guess those are some of the things that you would look for. But, I think it's not just, is my kid going to sign up for ISIS or become a domestic terrorist, but even I worry about the active shooter situation. What we saw in Newtown, Connecticut, when kids maybe just have a mental health issue. What do you do to intervene? And it's really important. If you don't want to go to the police, and I can understand why a parent might not want to go to the police, trying to get your child some mental health assistance and intervention can really help, because sometimes kids are depressed and undiagnosed. I read recently that parents are very eager to take their child to the doctor when they've got a physical illness
Sure.
or a broken bone or something else, but are very reluctant to take their child for mental health issues, because we don't want to stigmatize our child, or we're afraid to pass judgment. But that kind of health treatment is absolutely just as important as any kind of physical illness, and we need to make sure get past any stigma and make sure our kids are getting the mental health help that they need before they go off the rails.
Absolutely, and again, limiting the social media that focuses on that, and I think that has definitely been a challenge that we freedom of speech is great, but when it creates this kind of issue in these kind of situations, social situations, there's got to be some kind of. I remember growing up and watching I Love Lucy, and this kind of stuff, we were never exposed to.
It's a very different
and so
world.
It's a different world, and our kids have to deal with these issues that are so much beyond their years, and it's hard to have them digest that and not be, not fall victim to these issues. Barbara, you are also on the Attorney General's Advisory Committee, and you do so much. You are 24/7 engaged within the communities, within the state and the federal level too. But this is the Terrorism and National Security Committee. Talk to us about that, and what's your role, and how effective is that in what's happening nationally and internationally?
Yeah, so it's a great privilege. The Attorney General has a committee of about a dozen U.S. attorneys from all around the country that gets together in Washington about once a month to advise the Attorney General on what's really happening in the field, because you can get very secluded there in the Beltway and have a focus on what's happening in Washington, but she wants to know what's happening out in the field. So I served under Attorney General Holder and continue under Attorney General Loretta Lynch, and I chair the subcommittee of that group on terrorism and national security. And it's wonderful because I have a voice directly to the Attorney General on what's going on in our community in the arena of terrorism and national security. Things like watch listing, I have directly talked to the Attorney General about. Things like countering violent extremism, how we help prevent kids from being recruited by ISIS. I want to listen to our community and take those thoughts directly back to the Attorney General.
That's wonderful. That's it. Having that direct ear and having you being able to evaluate what's going on here and sharing and getting information on a national level is quite important. Immigration has been a huge issue as well. The borders and like you said, just the changing in demographics, changes our environment and our thought process. So what do you think the future of that is? Immigration, our borders, the DREAM Act, that whole concept.
Yeah, I don't know. I read recently that one of the priority issues for the Obama administration until the end of the term is to try to get some meaningful immigration reform. We have, many people here in the United States who are not documented, and no one really has a great solution for how to solve that problem. So I'm hopeful that some solution will occur before the end of the term. But, in the meantime, America is a land of immigrants. Bring us your huddled masses. That's what we're all about. And so we, at least, all we can do from our perspective is try to be welcoming to immigrant communities. Michigan is a state that has seen population decline. And so I'm a believer, as is the governor, that we want to be a beacon to people from all over the world to come to Michigan. And how do we do that? By making it a place where people feel welcome, by making sure the law works for everyone. If people's rights are violated, making sure that we, as the U.S. Attorney's Office, defend those rights. For example, at the last Bridges meeting, we talked about a recent Supreme Court ruling that will have a positive impact on immigrant communities and non-immigrant communities involving women who wear the hijab. Mm-hmm. There was a case of a woman who sought a job at Abercrombie and Fitch, and won. She said it was employment discrimination when they said, well, it isn't your religion. It's that we have a no hats policy, and so we don't want you to wear. And we can't let anyone wear a hat. And the Supreme Court, it would be a reasonable accommodation to require that. So those are kind of small things that can have a big impact on making people feel welcome in Michigan. And so anything we can do to help defend people's rights, if people are aware of employers violating rights or schools violating rights, we want to know about it so that we can intervene and try to make sure people feel welcome here.
And do you see a larger influx, though, recently, given our international situation in regards to war and what's happening in Iraq?
I think there are a number of Syrian refugees. There have been Iraqi refugees. Yeah, we do. And many come to our community because we have established communities here. So we do see refugees coming in. If you want to see something wonderful and heartwarming, every single Thursday at 10 a.m. at the federal courthouse in downtown Detroit is an immigration and naturalization ceremony where people become U.S. citizens. And it's the most beautiful thing you will see. People from dozens of nations around the world, and all crying because they're so happy to become Americans. I don't think anyone can see that and not feel warmth that our country is a nation of immigrants.
Absolutely. We used to say it's a melting pot, but I think and you were at our last conference the year before with Edward James Olmos, and he had talked about it being just a fruit salad. Yeah. And that makes a lot of sense because we're not all melting in together.
No, and we don't want to.
We're just all participating and contributing something very special and different and very colorful to our community. Well, Barbara, thank you so much for being with us. I mean, I talked to you for another hour about all the wonderful things that are happening and the things that you are addressing. And you have had your plate full, but let me tell you, you have dealt with it with such charm and strength. And those two qualities are very valuable and very precious. And thank you for being at the Realm and just making things happen in such a positive way. You have your challenges, but you handle them so easily and you make it look so easy. So thank you very much. Barbara McQuade, the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Michigan, has been with us today on Community Connection.